Today we have a very special guest episode where we are joined by Sam O'Brien. Sam joined RSA in 2011, shortly after they acquired Archer Technologies and supported and led the go-to-market for RSA Archer in the APAC region for 10 years. And continued leading the business after Archer was spun off as an independent company in 2021. So lots of very interesting experience in that respect. Sam, welcome to the podcast. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lara, and thank you to the team at Hubscale for the opportunity to get involved with today's podcast. So you've covered off some of the basics there, but I've been working in the governance, risk compliance, and cybersecurity industry for the full sort of 22 years of my career. I was really fortunate to land a graduate position while I was still studying that gave me my first foray into what was back then called the info security space, which obviously went on to be given the flashier title of cybersecurity, and managed to stay in that industry up until this very time today. So I've had the privilege of working in different capacities. I started my career working in government, helping organizations run their InfoSec and what would later become known as their GRC programs. After some time in Australia, a little bit of time in the UK, actually, I wanted to break into consulting and had the opportunity to do that for 5 years and really loved kind of getting the cross-industry experience that came with it. And then back in 2010, I had a buddy of mine who'd gone to work for RSA. And around this time, there were a few, the GRC technology space was really just Excel before sort of 2010. But some players started really hitting the ground in Asia Pac, one of those being Archer, who was acquired by RSA. And I had the opportunity to come and join the organization. And very proud to have been the second Archer employee in Asia Pac. I actually joined the team as a pre-sales consultant, working alongside the first employee who was a sales rep back then, and managed to grow a career that I'm very, very proud of within Archer. I spent time working in the pre-sales organization, went to lead the pre-sales organization, and then 10 years ago, an opportunity came up to lead the sales organization as we continued our march into the region. When I joined the organization, very, very small number of clients, and I'm very proud of where we got the business to by the time I moved on. But thanks again for the opportunity, Lara.
Oh, well, thank you for coming. I think there's a lot of people that'd be very interested in, your experience and how you've gotten to, lead RSA to where it is today and the Archer company as well. So I guess to kick things off, there's a lot of cyber vendors that want to expand globally, and will often not have a strong understanding of the APAC region. Typically cyber vendors are headquartered in Israel or America. And they want to get a better understanding before breaking into that region. How did you approach the a journey of expanding across the APAC region at RSA?
Sure. Well, APAC's an incredible region. I've had the privilege of working across it in detail these last 15 years. Wonderful if you like to travel. Wonderful if you want to experience the many sort of amazing sites, the people, the food that's there. But it can be challenging for a lot of organizations getting off the ground. At the time when I started with RSA, we had the privilege, I guess, of working or the benefit of working in somewhat of an overlay model. So we had a bit of, I guess, reach on the ground already, and that came with its own benefits, but some challenges along the way. Maybe we can explore that a little bit later. But looking at some of the tactics that we use, if I was to be embarking on that journey again, or sort of sharing some insights on really how to help an organization expand its footprint in APAC, I think first and foremost, it's really, really critical to recognize that APAC's not a homogenous market. It's a region that can be decomposed in many, many, many different ways. So, of course, it's going to depend on the offering that you have. Maybe it's something very broad, maybe it's something like laser focused, but you've really, really got to invest the time to think about, what are the local drivers in the markets that you want to go after? Again, recognizing it's not homogenous. You don't just go after APAC. You've got to decompose it into either sub-regions or certain industry types or economic groups to start to pursue it that way. You've got to map some of those drivers to your key capabilities. Most importantly, you've got to be able to find an appreciation of value, and an appreciation of value that's going to be at the scale that you're looking for your clients to actually invest in your technology, and then find those clients that are going to be willing to invest. All the while, you've got to be thinking about, how are we going to lock in with some of the budgeting cycles? There are some parts of the region where you can tap into some shorter term capital and expenditure. There are other parts of the region where it's a multi-year journey, and certainly industries like government in most countries, you'd be looking at multiple years to get to a sale. So you've really got to be thinking about a lot of those drivers there. So kind of to recap on a couple of those points, Lara, for any organization coming in that first time, it's really about, good, thorough market segmentation, really thinking about how you're going to find some of those opportunities. And I think, from my own experience at the time, being able to find those locations that can line up with how your organization has already been successful in finding a client that's willing to invest, the faster you're going to get that first threshold. And then, of course, once you've got that covered, you can start think about your second wave and your third wave into the market. I know for a lot of let's say American organizations and out there, Australia is a location that has a lot of affinity at times. So it was just, sort of one example there of where a lot of organizations, I think, coming into the market would look initially.
Oh, 100%. And I guess for you, what were the main challenges that you faced throughout the growth?
I was with Archer for many years, with RSA for many years, and we were actually one of the first, not the first, but one of the first to market broadly with a GRC technology offering. So selling a new type of offering in a previously unsold to market, that was absolutely, the number one challenge that we faced. And I mentioned appreciation of value before, and we certainly had to invest the time, not just in finding clients that would appreciate the value, but actually like really like nurturing, how to understand the value that a solution in the GRC space could provide. And so over the years, we saw some markets mature. They went through their, typical adoption curves, through education, um, then eventually, demand, and then accelerating demand, and then some market maturity where companies weren't just buying their first solution of that type. Maybe they were buying their second or third, or they were refitting to a solution that was more appropriate to their needs. To what becomes a very competitive market over times as it becomes more and more established. So I think certainly like appreciating the amount of time it can take if you are first to market or early to market with a new offering. It can take a lot of at bats to really get those first few runs on the table. Now, hopefully, for some of our listeners out there, they're coming into a market where either they've got something that's so super compelling, or that's so innovative and so obvious in terms of how it delivers value that they can start moving straight away. But yeah, if it is a newer offering, then typically you're going to have to assess, is this something that people are familiar with buying, or is that education going to be needed? I think then kind of building on top of that, some of those insights that are just shared, really thinking about how you need to localize your offering for the market. And I don't just mean language, like language is a given in some regions where they're non-English speaking, but really the positioning of value and the localizing of the messaging around the value that you provide to really align with the leads of those markets.
Yeah, 100%. And I think everyone likes to think that their product is the one that, it is always that is going to break the market. But, sometimes it is sometimes it, it really is a lot more difficult, particularly within those new regions as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. There's a risk of trying to go too broad and failing in the process. But if you can narrow down again, like I mentioned earlier,
yeah.
on where some of those indicators of success have been experienced already, and then trying to repeat as much of that as possible, then that can help you really accelerate the penetration into the market and avoid some of those challenges I mentioned.
Yeah, completely. What would you say are the main mistakes that are made when trying to penetrate the APAC market in particular?
Yeah. I think, not understanding, drivers and market fit, if you were just to, let's say you've had a lot of success in one market already, it's not a copy paste job, right? You do have to invest that time to really appreciate some of those local nuances. Like I said, just at a very simple level, what are the market drivers? Is it something that's maybe a sort of purchase that's driven through regulation? Well, have you figured out what those regulations are, or is it something that's becoming, let's say a common area of investment for a CISO, right? Have you made sure that that's a common area of investment for the CISOs in your target markets, or have you spoken to an analyst, let's say, to help kind of back up your understanding there? I think also not appreciating just the general sort of complexity and geography of the region. Setting up shop in APAC is not just about putting one person in and that person being your APAC guy, right? It's a big region. It takes a lot of time to move around. There's language considerations. There's tax considerations, obviously, in terms of how people need to do business. There's different business practices. There's even operational needs. There's no one size fits all tool, let's say, for finding contact information. You often need a bit of a patchwork of tooling to solve some of those things. So again, it comes back to in terms of common mistakes, don't go too broad. Really try and narrow that down to where you can find some bite and some ability to move forward. I talked a little bit about budgeting and sales cycles before. From a sales leader's perspective, and even just from a rep's perspective, that obviously has an impact on your ability to forecast. I think there's a huge risk in being overly confident on deals if you don't understand, how certain countries buy, or how certain partners, let's say, communicate their expectations on when a deal is going to happen. So you really need to build that up through experience, and it can take a few knocks on the chin to really narrow into how you're going to execute. I think one of the other common mistakes is really not appreciating some of the consumption and buying preferences for the organizations that fall into your target market. So, you know, do they like to buy direct, or do they prefer to buy through partners? Is it a market or an industry that's maybe there's a strong preference for buying like in more of an MSSP capability? Does your product lend itself to an MSSP type of offering? Um, is your offering SaaS, or do you also offer on-premise? What do your clients in those locations want or need? What does their regulator say that they can have? So they're all the sorts of things that really need to be thought through in terms of how you're going to start to penetrate the market and figure out what your wave one, two, and three attack plan is going to be.
Mhm. No, completely. And it's an interesting point you made about, how they want to buy as well. Like I know a lot of American vendors when they come to EMEA is heavily channel driven, and that can often be, a bit of a change in pace as well. And but also within that there's the type of, channel partners too, right? So interesting too on that side. Um, obviously the APAC market, as you've already mentioned, has some very diverse cultures within it, from Japan, Singapore, Australia. They're all very distinct within culture. How do you approach managing and recruiting across such a diverse team?
Yeah, I think the old saying is culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I certainly subscribe to that. I think often if an organization is going to be starting up in APAC as part of a foreign company, it's quite likely, or sorry, an out of region company, I should say, it's quite likely that APAC is going to be the smaller region, from a personnel perspective, at least to begin with. So I think really, figuring out what your culture is going to be as a team and how you can make that an attractive culture to bring people in. Not to say that culture is everything; it's going to starve without good business strategy, but it's really, really important to have that in place. I think, in the beginning of setting up in a region like APAC, you have to recognize that it's going to be difficult to get that homogenous culture because it's not a homogenous region. There are going to be nuances, and you've got to cater to that. So I think it's about figuring out what you can put in place that's going to be universal to unite people. Working in sales, obviously, performance and achievement are a given. They're a must for any sales organization. But what sort of a culture do you want to build on top of that? Is it a team-centric culture? Is it a supportive culture? Is it more of a sort of agile and innovative culture? Is it more of an elite culture? And then all of those things have to be balanced out with how you're going to scale up in those various regions. I think it's also important to realize that um, there's just no nuances in how you're going to execute. It could be just a simple thing like language. Maybe not everybody speaks English on the team. So how are you going to do team calls? Can you run a broad APAC wide or even a global team call? I had a buddy who started with a new company and they do a global stand-up. 85-person company. They do a global stand-up every week and they make that work. I personally don't know how that would work, but in APAC, you're going to have different languages, but also for me, it was about how do you make it relevant for everyone on the team? So, you've got to figure out, how you're going to drive some of those more cadence related activities as a team there. Also, I think for, really getting things up and running well and, managing people and getting people organized, it's about understanding cultural differences as well. I've read some fantastic books and listened to some awesome audiobooks and podcasts over the years, but things like the culture code and the culture map, understanding just different traits in communication, how people speak, how people hear information, how they want to be presented with, either little detail or a lot of detail to get their points across, so that you can really, find the best way of getting everybody on the same page. And that can quite often be difficult. I think it's also important to look at ways to get over some of the cliches that exist in the region. I mean, there's a whole bunch of cliches about communication preferences, but one of the ones that I ran into all the time is that people from some countries, aren't going to ask questions in team meetings or aren't going to put their hand up in a group discussion. That's that's true to an extent, but that doesn't mean that those people don't have anything to say. So your job as a leader or as someone who's there to sort of drive engagement and drive participation. It's about finding ways to actually getting people talking. Like, we're using Zoom today. I'll say when we first moved to Zoom as an organization, it was a huge win for overcoming some of those obstacles because we were finding that people were very, very willing to participate with things like the Q&A feature and the chat feature and the annotate feature to get involved in the discussion. So that was a huge win for group discussions, just as an example there. I think, a couple other points there on, managing and recruiting in the region. Um, I think certainly on the recruitment side of things, you've got to realize that if you're a new offering in the market, there's an element of risk taking. There's an element of excitement, right, with a new offering, but an element of risk taking as well when you're convincing and sort of trying to entice someone to come and join your organization. And so you're gonna have to really think about, what it is that's going to help them as an individual mitigate that risk. And, there's always, things like pay and incentives and especially uncapped incentives, those sorts of things that can excite people. But, how can you use the reputation that you've built in other locations to kind of propel people's excitement and interest in coming and working for you? Um, how can you, share with them your own excitement about the offering, your own sort of elevator pitch and the reasons you're with the company, your sort of brand, if you will, for being there. And what can you do to share the team that is there to support them, whether it's people in region or people beyond the region that are still supporting you, and their character, their skill, their capability. Maybe by sort of teasing them during the interview process in some way, bringing them into some of the discussions so that the people you're looking to recruit, can get exposed to them and hopefully see that they've got a great opportunity to crush it by coming over to work for you.
Completely, completely. And as you say, there's also different, hiring processes as well across different countries, different notice periods. It's always surprising
Yeah.
some weird legal sort of practices in some countries.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Completely.
30, 60, 90 days lead time sometimes on getting people across. And I know in some of the territories in Asia Pac, you'll have offers out there, but they're very aggressive hiring markets. And in the 90 days that you're waiting for someone to come and start, their old boss might have had just enough time to woo them to come back over, or they got another offer. And I don't know if you have this term in the UK, but in real estate in Australia, you talk about being gazumped. So you
Yeah.
get beaten to the post by another offer. And that happens all the time. But it's just a fact of doing business sometimes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I guess to what advice would you have for any company that's looking to make their first hires within greenfield territories in the APAC region?
Yeah. I think first thing, Lara, is just to be super, super clear on what your goals are. You have to be really, really, really brutal about where you're going to get early success, and make sure you're going after those really, really well. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what are the goals that we have in terms of getting into the market? It's a little too simplistic just to say, hey, we're going to go and get X% of the top 100 companies, or you know go find a foothold in the top X economies within the region. It's not going to be enough. You've got to be able to figure out where you got a good fit, where you're going to go after it, and then how you start finding people that are going to help you propel that. The fly in, fly out salesperson works for a period of time, but at some point you've got to set up shop. So being able to find good people when you're ready to do that. Next thing I think that's really, really important is to be really like brutally honest about how you're going to go after the market and how you're going to not only excite clients to evaluate you and consider you and hopefully purchase your solution, but how you're going to make them successful. How you're going to make maybe your partners who you're working with along the way successful as
Yeah.
well. So, obviously enablement, delivery, client success along the way are really, really important. But before you get to all of that, how are you actually going to create demand? How do you find those leads? How do you find those prospects? Are there associations you need to get involved with? Are there industry forums, et cetera, that you need to be in? And what's it going to take, from a just purely from a cost perspective to be involved in those sorts of forums? Asia Pac's tough at times because there's no big like RSA conference, for example. I saw that Hubscale was at RSA conference recently
Yeah.
over in Stanford. I was able to go to that conference many, many times. Wonderful, wonderful conference. But there's no like single conference quite like that for Asia Pac where you can get that kind of mass market exposure. So you've got to think about, all right, well, we can put some of our budget into this analyst company's, cyber risk conference over there, but then we've got to go do a little bit over there as well, depending on how we want to spread around and start to nurture. Um, so that all kind of plays into your hiring strategy in terms of where you want your people to be, what you need to be able to have them conduct on maybe the behalf of the marketing team, let's say, or be able to deliver, in terms of, getting that message out there. But I think the one of the biggest recommendations I would have, this kind of links back to your previous question as well, Lara, is that you need to be willing to invest in recruiters. Some managers will, and some organizations will look at recruiter fees as being considerable, and they can be, but in my experience, it's money well spent. Certainly, if you've if you're moving into a market for the first time or into a region for the first time, it's very unlikely that you'll have TA people based in those locations. You'll probably have people supporting remotely. They could be the world's best TA people, but a lot of the time, trying to hire in cybersecurity and in GRC, it's about having those relationships on the ground. So being able to find the people, the recruiters specifically that can get you in front of the right candidates is incredibly, incredibly important because you got to pay for recruitment fees, but there's also a big cost to picking up the wrong person or picking up someone that's subpar and then having to deal with that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Obviously, I very much agree with the latter statement. I often find that when with greenfield territories is often when an external recruiter can add the most value because not only is it so much more critical to right hire, because you really need someone that's truly self-sufficient and can almost lead strategy in a particular area, but also, as you say, you're less likely to have knowledge of HR, hiring practices or the way the country does, runs their business either, or best strategies on that side. But you also made another point earlier that I also would love to highlight too, because I talk to candidates all the time where the headquarters is in a very different area of the world. And so things like whether, they could sell a deal, but then the delivery is just not done very well because it's not in the same time zone by, a strong, it's on the opposite side of the world, so it makes it much more difficult. Um,
That's where I think good partnerships, strategic partnerships have a real role to play.
mm,
You can find those partners that are aligned with your own interests and are operating in a related, if not direct space that you're working in, then that can help, really localize maybe some of the goodness that's coming out of your delivery team in another region, kind of indoctrinate the partner as your local team, get them up and running, and off you go.
Yeah, no, exactly. And even sometimes companies will hire a sales rep within a region but not have thought through who could be a good pre-sales engineer in the short term. And
Yeah.
there's many situations really good sales reps have decided to leave a company because they can only book in sales calls and have pre-sale support in certain times of the day, which doesn't work for their customers.
Yeah.
Um, and
Right.
so yeah,
What a nice place to be.
yeah, it's not ideal at all.
I
Um,
think that, or if I can just add, I think that comes
yeah.
back to that sort of, that really that market readiness, asking yourself the tough questions, there's multiple ways to solve it as well. It's just being about being realistic with what your expectations are and what the results that you need to show back to your leadership are going to be with some of the results of those decisions. So, a lot of organizations will take a sales-led approach to getting into a region before marketing have had a chance to be on the ground, before product have really done a fit assessment, all those sorts of things. And, it ends up working out. It just takes a while and it's quite an expensive way to do it because you've got
Mm,
to, usually a highly paid rep there out on the ground, not being able to be proficient, having to spend a lot of their time, recrafting marketing collateral or localizing documents or, trying to do a demo when they're terrible at it, all of those sorts of things that come back to your point about pre-sales.
yeah.
Um, and it's not to say that that's the wrong approach. You just have to realize that there's pros and cons to doing it that way when you're not quite at a state of having that product market fit.
Mm. No, exactly. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with, I think. And also speaking about having companies that are headquartered in a very different area of the world, it can be quite difficult to push back and educate. Well, I've put American vendors in this question, but to be fair, it could be any vendor that isn't headquartered within the region. As an APAC leader in particular, on best practices within that region, for example, if there's just cultural differences to the way business is done. I know a few people who have done business in Japan for the first time and have found not only sales cycles are longer, but then also there's certain cultural cues that you have to have that you never think to have. But that can affect a lot of things like forecasting, how quickly the region is built, and revenue overall. So what have you found is the best way to have some of these conversations that could be quite difficult?
Yeah. Tactfully. But a few different techniques, Lara, and I've been fortunate to work with a variety of leaders. Some of that have had immense experience in APAC, some that have had a little, maybe some that have none, that but still have a kind of an open mind. But typically those sorts of discussions I found are best to have on a one-to-one basis. Obviously, try and bring in whatever data that you can bring in to back up some of your arguments so that it becomes obviously a little bit more objective. But your CRM is going to be a good source of data for average time to close deals, let's say, or amount of time you might spend in certain sales stages before you can move forward. I've seen a lot of great analyst documents over the years that start to break down, let's say expected growth rates in certain regions, so you can start to get some statistics behind it. It might be, a stat around adoption of a new cyber offering, for example, or adoption of services in a particular area. So that can start to help to build your case of where you might either be ahead of the pack or behind in some of the other regional or global expectations that are there. But also, I've used everything from interest rates, FX rates, economic forecasts, all those sorts of things to put some fuel behind the argument. But you know, with any new leader that's coming in that you need to go through that sort of education cycle with, there's an opportunity, right? You've got an opportunity to hopefully educate and raise some awareness. Maybe if it's a leader that's had some experience, maybe some negative experiences in the region where they've maybe failed or run into obstacles, it's an opportunity for you to try and reposition or maybe give a little bit of a move on some of their preconceptions or challenge those preconceptions where they exist and hopefully overcome them if you believe that they're incorrect and you can make something happen. Um, but the number one way, right? The number one way is very simply get your leader in region.
Yeah.
So get them out to meet your clients, get them out to meet your prospects, get them out to the clients that are just starting their journey, get them out to meet the ones that have been with you for a while. If you've kind of been in the market, maybe, for a number of quarters or even years already, just so that they can, hear the good, but also hear the challenges as well. And, it puts a lot of meat on the bone. I think a lot of makes it very, very tangible, very real when you're able to do that. I think also if you've got the opportunity to get your leadership there, it's a great opportunity to get them in front of your partners as well, so they can hear about what they need to be successful too, or where they're running into challenges, or maybe where they've got great ideas of where you could innovate and change up the way that you do things, or pivot your offering in some way to maximize a new local need that you weren't quite aware of.
No, completely, completely. I really like that. Some solutions as well. Really humanizing it really humanizes it, doesn't it? If you actually have them in person and can hear from other people, not even yourself,
Yeah.
where what's actually needed and what the reality is. Uh,
Exactly.
so
Then
I
also
guess,
use the traveling sales executive play as well to hopefully get some good meetings and level up a little bit in your accounts. But yeah, it's critical, and I think that is the most effective. And obviously, you can't have leadership out all the time, but anytime you can, take it.
100%. And I guess to shift a little bit in topics from, growing APAC region to more of yourself as a leader and more about pre-sales in particular. This question I've asked quite a few different SE leaders, but sales engineers are notoriously quite a difficult hire to make. And there's quite a diverse opinion on what even a sales engineer is. Some people do like them to basically be able to write code themselves. For some people, it is just being that technical voice. What kind of SC background have you found to be successful?
Lara, I've seen like all sorts of backgrounds succeed. I've seen all sorts of backgrounds fail. It's something that you've got to continuously work on, but also be open to ideas and maybe your own uh, preconceptions being challenged. But generally, when I'm working with our pre-sales manager, or where when I was previously a pre-sales manager myself, or if I was looking for new candidates going forward, there'd be a few things that are going to be top of mind for me, just in what I'm looking for from the candidate, and got to be realistic that getting all of those things is going to be done near impossible and incredibly unlikely. There's very, very few unicorns that tick every box. And usually, when you find someone that ticks every box, it's because they're coming from a competitor, and that comes with its own challenges as well at times. But really, the sort of five or six things that I'm looking for, first of all, if the person's got past pre-sales experience, then that's a huge win because they know what the expectations are. Maybe they don't know your product, or maybe they're maybe new to your space. Yeah, but if they've got that past pre-sales experience, then they're going to know how to present, they're going to know how to demo, they're going to know how to handle an RFP, all those sorts of things. So they know the ins and outs really well. So that's a huge win, but it's not a given, and it's also not critical. We've had a lot of people join organizations that I've been a part of. I myself joined RSA back in the day in pre-sales, coming from a consulting background, and wasn't an easy first few months, but got there eventually. The second point, you kind of touched on this as well. You talked about coding, but I think technical proficiency in the space that you're working, yeah, there's all sorts of levels of technical precision proficiency that may be needed. There's some products that are going to be like super hardcore, and you're going to need to know the ins and outs of like packets and coding and all that sort of stuff. I haven't had to work down at that level, but I certainly have colleagues and buddies that have worked in that space. So is it something that you need to have on day one? Is it something that could be taught? If the person doesn't have that skill, do they at least have the right sort of technical aptitude in something related where they could make that jump easily? They're the sorts of things you got to think about there. And kind of closely related to technical expertise, I think and technical proficiency is also like domain expertise and proficiency. So you could be the world's best coder, but if you've never worked in cyber before, that's going to be a learning curve. Or if you've never worked in malware or threat detection or fraud, right? they're all areas that have their own language, their own nuances, their own nomenclature, and you're gonna have to adapt to those pretty quickly. And again, the things that you can teach, but you've just got to figure out if the person's got the proficiency to make that jump, if they're going to be short on that. One of the most important things for me in terms of things that I'm looking for when I'm hiring is just general business acumen. There's two sides to the word sales engineer, right? Sales and engineer, and it's got to be that kind of coming together of that technical grounding on the engineering side, but also the business acumen and grounding in sales to really make it sing. So again, it's going to depend on the offering, but you've got to be able to, walk the walk, talk the talk, keep up with the sales team to some level. And that's quite often something you can't teach. It's just something that's usually inherent people in terms of how they present themselves, how they communicate, how they work, how fluid they are in conversations, and you just kind of pick it up pretty quickly. You pick up that quality, I should say, in people pretty quickly. The last one, and this is a bit of a wiggle word here, but it's X factor. And this to me is actually one of the non-negotiables in hiring. Um, I want to work with people that are interesting to spend time with, that I think are going to be interesting to put in front of my clients, that are going to be compelling and engaging, right? If they're not holding me in a conversation, some countries they might call it a beer test, but I've hired plenty of teetotalers over the years, so it's not about your ability to have a beer. It's just about your ability to be engaging and be interesting and be a person that you want to spend time around. Because if that person's boring you or not engaging you in the time you're spending with them, how do you think they're going to be in front of your clients? And that skill there is not something I only look for in pre-sales. That's in any client-facing hire that we're making.
Oh, completely. Another test I've also heard is the airport test, which is almost similar but slightly different. Of could you spend about 3 hours at the airport with them if you're slightly over?
That's like a very elaborate, but also very real,
Yeah,
like scenario, especially working in sales. You do spend a lot of time with people at airports, in taxis,
yeah,
Starbucks, that sort of stuff, right? And considerable amount of time, especially when your flights get disrupted.
yeah. No, exactly. So it's a real need, and particularly if you're going somewhere like RSA. Um, how have you often attracted the right talent for your team? I think there's like multiple elements for this of both the, methods of hiring, but then also how do you make a role exciting for someone?
Yeah, 100%. There's a few different elements. So I'll touch on a couple of things that I've found to be like really important. But one is as a hiring manager or even as a senior member of staff, right? You've always got to be prospecting. You've always got to be selling. You never know when you're going to hear, let's say, a client name drop an SE or a rep that they really love from this other vendor, right? So you've got to keep your ear to the ground on those things, or have your own network where you can ask them like, hey, when did you last meet, whoever you're hiring for, that type of profile that really impressed you. Oh, what was their name? And LinkedIn, and off you go from there. But yeah, that sort of prospecting piece is really important there. But walking around, shaking hands at conferences, all those sorts of things. Even sometimes, the people that you meet in, evaluations, just keeping an open mind because you never know when you're going to find someone where like that could be, a future fantastic SE, a future fantastic rep, a future fantastic CSM. So, like I said, always be prospecting. The other side of it is always be selling. So in those interactions, when you're having an extended conversation with someone at a conference, and if you see them as someone that might be a fit, don't just wait until an interview to really start positioning to them on the virtues of coming and working for your organization, wherever that might be. Don't, and also once you get into an interview, don't take for granted that that person really, really wants to come and work for you. You've got to be selling to them at every step along the way. I certainly made this mistake very early on in my career as a new manager, in thinking that everyone that was turning up for an interview had applied, right? Not realizing that we had talent acquisitions people and recruiters that were putting people in the room, and I had a job to do in selling to them, not just after I liked them, but I had to get them to like the company in the first place. So that was a couple of points there. But if I take it to more of a holistic level, Lara, I have a friend, a mentor, former colleague of mine, a guy by the name of Antoine Letard, and he once set a goal for the organization that he was running, and he said, I want to build a team that's so successful, so energized, so renowned that people are literally falling over each other to come and work with them, right? And that's a fantastic goal, and it's the type of goal that you've always got to be working on, and you might not ever get there, but it's something that's really, really worthwhile plugging away at. And to get to that, there's a mix of things you need to be able to pull off. You need obviously an offering that's got a good reputation that can deliver value. You've got to have opportunity in the market to go after it. But most importantly, you've got to have a good team that works well together, that achieves, that exceeds their goals, and a good culture to underpin how that team goes and gets things done. And I think, like I said, it's a goal that you've got to work at forever, and some people might not ever achieve it. Um, at some point, I hope as a leader that people do achieve it, because when you get there, it's fantastic. Things just happen, the results come, but it can be fleeting. And like I said, it needs constant work. But cherish it if anyone listening on the podcast ever gets it. But also don't think that it's just going to automatically be there forever. It requires constant work. I think just taking things down a level, not so holistically down to a little bit more of a tactical level, but I think being able to impart your own enthusiasm for, why you're with the organization, being able to share maybe your journey, is really, really important. And I think that comes back to that, always be selling side of the recruitment and talent acquisition process. But then you've also got to have a good framework for validating your applicants that are coming through. I love, I'm big on team culture, always have been. So for me, it's not just about leadership evaluating the individuals. I would also always encourage a lot of peer level interactions, because that's helping that individual get exposed to some of the caliber of people that are there. It's also helping getting good feedback on from those people in your team already on their perception of the person, how they think they're going to fit in and, align and, ultimately, work hard together.
Okay.
I also, and sorry, just to add one more point there.
Oh,
Sorry, I
no,
know
not at all.
I've talked a little bit here, but I think having some sort of practical activity is really important as well. It's easy just to have conversation after conversation after conversation, but this is something I picked up from some of RSA and Archer's really excellent pre-sales leaders over the years. But just having some sort of technical activity as part of the recruitment process. And it's not just for pre-sales, like for a rep, maybe ask for a presentation on a certain topic or a pitch or, a rough cut territory plan, to help really validate, that the person has the aptitude to maybe pivot a little bit, get uncomfortable, figure things out, but also see, how committed they are to going after the role as well.
Completely. So, I guess from someone from your background, you're someone that has run both sales and pre-sales teams. Do you find that there is a different approach that is needed for running an SE and a sales team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, without a doubt, there's a different approach that's needed, but that's more kind of operationally within the teams. I think there's still a big opportunity for collaboration and alignment between sales leadership and pre-sales leadership, just to make sure that everybody's working towards the same goal, to make sure that any issues are being put to bed quickly. Team conflict is always a part of doing business. It's kind of healthy at times because people are testing each other and pushing the limits of how you get things done. But it can also be like a bit of a water leak. It's one thing to see, maybe in the kitchen you've got a little patch of water on the ground and you walk past it, you get the Wet-X and you clean it up and then you're done. But if it comes back the next day and you just keep mopping it up and don't really get to the root of the issue, then you could very quickly have a foundation problem.
Mm.
So you've got to make sure you get to the root of some of those over time. But I think for me, part of I guess the difference in approach that's needed, on the pre-sales side of things, a lot of it is about that sort of ability to, appreciate the client's problems and turn them into capabilities and give confidence that you can go and exceed in delivering those capabilities. And a lot of the coaching and management is about the finesse in how you deliver that. A lot of it is about managing, workload and competing priorities. Whereas on the sales side, a lot of it is about activity and throughput and conversion, and of course, the forecast as well, and the quality of the sale in the process.
Completely. And I guess what I find quite interesting about your experience as well is you are someone that has come from, a pre-sales background, but you've gone on to be, head of the whole sales organization for APAC. So how have you found it being a sales leader as someone with a pre-sales background as opposed to, say, the more traditional direct sales background?
Yeah, it was an adjustment to say the least, Lara. But
I can imagine.
I was able to make the jump. But yeah, those first the first sort of 12 to 18 months was a big adjustment for me. I think there's a perception out there that people who have made that jump but have sort of skipped the rep step in the middle, or never held a bag, or whatever you want to say. Um, I think that perception is garbage, honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, if anyone's watching this, that people will flame me with comments or whatever. But let me kind of back that up with a little bit of thought. But I think that sellers who've got an SE background actually have a massive advantage. SEs have usually worked across a lot of opportunities. They're usually mapped to more than one rep, or more than one territory. And by virtue of that, they get exposed to a lot more sales cycles. And so that inherently brings experience with it. Okay, it may not be as deep or even involved in certain parts of the sales process, like very tip of the spear prospecting, or very sort of tail end of the deal negotiating. But those are things that can be taught and enriched, and enabled along the way with the right leaders supporting them. I think for SEs though, who've made that jump over, a lot of the time they've seen great reps. They've also seen bad reps as well, so they can model their behavior in terms of what they've seen work in the field, and use that to sort of create their own DNA as a rep or even as a sales leader. So anyway, a couple of points there I think are really important. But I was really fortunate to work in organizations over the years where a lot of people had made that jump and been very successful in doing so. And so that made the journey a little bit easier. But like I said, it wasn't without its own sort of needs and adjustments. I think they're both very difficult, but also very rewarding roles in their own way. Different sorts of management skills that are needed at times. Talked about sort of technical ability and finesse versus the sort of the sales cycle, activity influence, etc. That's needed to really be a successful rep. But for me, it was really a sort of look at the two different career disciplines, and I think a couple of things stand up as contrast, but also ways to work through that adjustment quickly. On one side, one of the first things that hit me, I had to really realign my sense of achievement and my sense of the value that I provided back to the organization. So, as an SE, I got a huge buzz. I got a kick. It was like my fix. If me or someone in my team just crushed a session. If we did a killer demo, or just the pitch was incredible, or you go toe to toe with someone on the client's technical team that wants to take you through the ringer with all sorts of technical questions, but you get through it. When you walk out of that meeting and it's been done well, at the time, there's no better feeling, right? You're like,
Yeah.
nailed it, right? Really nailed it. Pats on the back from your rep, or maybe your VP's there with you, and that's where the reward center really comes in.
Mm.
Sales is totally different, right? You could do the world's best RFP response, do the world's best sales presentation. None of that matters. That's expected, right? None of that converts into like real that sense of achievement I was talking about before, until you get the deal closed, and that could be months, quarters, sometimes years after
Yeah.
that session happened. It may be never if you lose the deal, or maybe the client's budget gets repositioned. And yeah, that adjustment in terms of like how I get a sense of reward from what I'm doing, like really hit me hard in those first few quarters. I certainly also remember um, much more the first few quarters that, or sorry, the first quarter that I misplan, as opposed to the first quarters that made plan. Just the pain of that experience stayed with me a lot longer than the sense of goodness that came from making plan. But I think, for anyone that's sort of in that position of making that jump over, it's really important just to recognize how you're going to add value to the team, especially if you've gone from being in pre-sales or pre-sales leadership straight into sales leadership and you've not been a rep. Um, you need to realize that there are certain things that you're just not going to be ready to do well. I talked about negotiation before as being something that not a lot of SEs get exposed to. So thinking that you can come in and coach a tenured rep on how to successfully negotiate a really, really difficult contract, you're absolutely dreaming. So don't pretend, right? And don't try and represent that you're going to be able to do that. Instead, you've got to, really focus on where you can add value. I embraced servant leadership as kind of an ethos early on, and was just upfront with people. It was like, hey, yeah, I'm going to be terrible at these things, but
Yeah,
these things over here, I'm going to be fantastic at, and I'm here as your partner and also as your leader as well to help you knock these things out of the park that you're probably going to struggle with otherwise.
yeah,
It's like, in the first few quarters as a leader, just nailing the client pitch, making sure we were razor sharp on the value prop and pricing, those sorts of things. I did a really good job at those things, but yeah, commercial negotiations were not my forte to begin with. So just recognizing some of those things, I think it's really important to be able to do that, Laura.
completely. And I think almost to your point where you're like, there's some people, some things you'll never be able to support on fully. I also think as a good leader, you don't necessarily have to personally be able to, support on everything. And actually, a good trait is someone that can hold their hands up and say, no, I actually can't help. But
Yep.
let me put you in touch with this other person
Yeah.
who actually
Yeah.
could help you quite well. I've had a
Exactly.
lot of
There's going to be a pretty
managers who've
decent.
done that.
There's going to be a pretty decent, like, however or but at the end of
Yeah,
that statement, right? Because
yeah,
it's still your job to help that team member succeed, right?
mm,
Even if you don't have that skill to impart or that experience to impart on them, go find the people that can, like, go find another rep in another territory that can help coach you or provide some advice, or another DM in the business or whoever it might be, to help overcome that gap. And like, you got to fight like hell for it
yeah.
to work, because that's a big part of servant leadership as well, is being that person that can help clear some of the roadblocks, or at least show the people how to clear the roadblocks. I think that's absolutely critical. So yeah, point well made there, Laura.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think something that I ask all leaders that have made it all the way up, there's many people within the whole go-to-market organization, whether that's pre-sales or sales, that would love to move into management and leadership, and their main goal is to be, a VP of APAC or APJ. What advice would you have for anyone looking to get to a VP level role?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, you've got to be really clear with yourself on what you actually want to achieve in your career and sort of what your
Mm,
motives for going after that sort of goal. I mean, it's a very sort of, I think, if you look at an organization hierarchically, it's like, yeah, you generally people will want to move up, but I guess the main question for me to ask is, is it because you want to be seen to be moving up, or you want to be seen to be making progress, right? Because I think having you know, judging your own success on being just because you made a move upward, I think is actually a very dated way of measuring your value or your progress within organizations. There's a ton of other ways to sort of progress and grow. I've seen a lot of fantastic ICs become, for want of a better term, like elite or expert ICs, maybe an SE that's, just crushing their own territory, but gets to become a coach in other territories, or takes on, like, part-time product management responsibilities, or gets to participate in global forums. I think they're fantastic ways to still show leadership without necessarily becoming a manager. Maybe on the rep side, it's taking on like a top tier territory, or becoming a thought leader in a certain area of execution, or a certain domain. Again, they're all sort of ways to still be leading, but not necessarily managing. Um, Maybe it's an opportunity to move into another part of the organization as well. I've worked with some fantastic folks that have made sort of lateral moves at the time that have opened up new doors for them. We had a fantastic professional services and sort of pre-sales resource. An opportunity came up for them to move into a different territory, to come and join product management as a sort of first product manager in that particular territory. And it was a bit of a gamble at the time, and I think they saw it as a bit of a lateral move, but it's opened up so many doors for them. And that individual now is easily the best product leader I've worked with, and a director of product management. So a fantastic move for them. So
Mm.
again, it comes back to why you want to make the change. Some people might say, well, okay, I need to do that to get more money. Well, it's not always the case as well. Probably a bigger package for a manager as opposed to an IC. But it's really just giving you less risk on the low end while taking away some of your upside on the high end. A great rep should really be out earning a great manager on a peer-to-peer basis. I think if you're in the top, 5% of reps at a company, you're probably earning more than the top, 10 or 20% of managers. I think that should be a given once
Yeah.
accelerators and things like that kick in. So yeah, there's ways to maximize your earnings as well. Um, but if you're going to make that jump, if the motivation is really about helping people, about having more influence, about maybe sharing some of your experiences along the way and helping others succeed along the way in doing so, if it's about like having a desire for having more influence and more say on how things get done because you're passionate and you believe in them, then you're on the right track, right? Your heart's in the right place, and I think then yeah, that's a good set of reasons to go after a role like that, because as a leader, you do need to be someone that's willing to put their hand up and speak out. You've got to be someone who's willing to get in front of issues or help people out who feel like they've maybe not been fairly treated. You own so you're responsible for everybody's success, but you own everybody's failure. There's a little bit of nuance in there, and you've got to be willing to take that on and really take the lead on helping people get to a point where they can succeed and be willing to manage expectations along the way to allow them to get to a point and give them the space and the support they need to get to that point that they can succeed. So like I said, if you're willing to take on some of those things and your heart's in the right place, then absolutely, that's a great career path. But um, it doesn't have to be everybody's career path. There's a ton of other ways to show growth and show leadership outside of becoming a manager.
Oh, completely. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that some people can make. As you say, if you want to make $1 million, it is much better to be a top sales rep. No,
They are rep. Yeah, be a rep.
um, but there's also a lot of satisfaction to come with being a leader and a manager as well. So
Absolutely.
so yeah, I think that's all the questions that we have. So that's it for another episode of the Hubscale podcast. I'd like to say a huge thanks to Sam for joining us here today. And for all of our listeners, be sure to check out our LinkedIn and YouTube channels for more episodes. But otherwise, thank you.
Thanks, Laura. All the best. Thanks for the opportunity as well to you and to Hubscale.
Of course.